It was of such extreme violence, of the utmost and exceptionally high seriousness, that it is difficult to comprehend why it was done. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life, with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years. On counts 4 to 11, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life, with a minimum term of 18 years, less 175 days served, on each count concurrently with each other.
I want you to think about something. If you knew a teenager had brought a knife to school, had been expelled for it, and had been referred to counter-terrorism programs multiple times, would you consider them a potential threat? Anyone with common sense would say yes. So how did Axel Rudakubana, who checked all these boxes, manage to slip through the cracks of Britain's security apparatus and commit one of the most heinous attacks on children in recent memory? The answer reveals uncomfortable truths about the systems we trust to keep us safe. When the facts don't suit the narrative, simply rewrite the rulebook. That's the extraordinary approach the government is taking in the wake of the Southport massacre, creating an entirely new classification system to distance themselves from what many would consider an obvious act of terrorism. Jonathan Hall KC's review has landed with a bureaucratic thud that defies common sense. Despite Rudakubana's meticulous planning of the horrific attack, Hall concluded there wasn't a clear ideological motivation.
The events today are just truly awful, and I know the whole country is deeply shocked at what they've seen and what they've heard. I do want to thank the emergency services of Merseyside Police who've had to respond to the most difficult of circumstances today. But I do also think about the emergency responders because they have responded to an awful incident today, and I want to thank them for the professionalism that they have shown in doing so.
Apparently the critical ingredient needed for the terrorism label. This remarkable conclusion has sparked public outrage, and rightly so. What's the government's solution to this inconvenient reality? Create an entirely new category, non-terrorist mass casualty attack planning. This isn't just semantic gymnastics. It's a calculated move that carries a life sentence, but conveniently sits outside terrorism legislation. Hall defends this new classification as necessary to avoid false positives in terrorism cases, but the timing and circumstances suggest something far more tactical. By reclassifying the attack, the government has engineered a clever escape route from accountability. This linguistic sleight of hand distances the case from the counter-terrorism apparatus that repeatedly failed to identify Rudakubana as a threat. The transition from terrorism to vague phrases like extreme violence carried out by loners and misfits in bedrooms serves a dual purpose. It both deflects responsibility and creates a new framework conveniently separate from existing counterterrorism structures. This classification shell game connects directly to how Rudakubana slipped through 3 separate prevent referrals.
On the 29th of July last year, Rudakubana left home and travelled by taxi to the Hart Space in Hart Street, Southport, armed with a large kitchen knife, which he had bought on the internet on the 13th of July, 16 days earlier. There were 26 children in the party, all of them happy and enjoying themselves. It started at about 9:30 that morning on a warm summer's day, but he had targeted those very young children, and over about 15 minutes he savagely killed 3 of them and attempted to kill 8 more, as well as 2 adults who tried to stop him.
By claiming he didn't fit a clear ideological mold, officials have crafted the perfect excuse for their repeated failures to properly assess his risk level. It's a circular logic that conveniently absolves the system. We didn't catch him because he doesn't fit our definitions, so we're changing the definitions to explain why we didn't catch him. The unavoidable reality is that a teenager with documented violent tendencies, possession of extremist materials, and deadly intentions was allowed to slip through governmental cracks repeatedly. This wasn't a lone wolf who appeared from nowhere. This was a known threat that multiple agencies failed to address. Far from being an unpredictable attack, Rudakubana's path to violence was marked by red flags so numerous they could have wallpapered his bedroom. What's genuinely shocking isn't just that he brought a knife to school at age 11, but that this early warning was followed by an escalating series of violent incidents that somehow failed to trigger meaningful intervention. The institutions tasked with protecting the public were presented with not just whispers of a problem, but deafening alarms they systematically chose to ignore. After his expulsion from Range High School, Ruda Cubana's violent tendencies didn't subside, they intensified. He physically assaulted another student with a hockey stick, prompting his transfer to not one, but two specialist schools for children with special needs, the Acorns School, and later, Pressfield High School. At these institutions, staff were so concerned about his behavior that they requested police protection during home visits. Think about that for a moment. Professionals trained to work with troubled children felt unsafe enough to require police escorts, yet this extraordinary measure somehow didn't trigger a more comprehensive risk assessment. The medical system made its own diagnosis, with local health workers identifying Ruda Cubana as having autism spectrum disorder. But this label seemed to function more as an explanation for his behavior rather than a catalyst for the intensive support he clearly needed. Meanwhile, Lancashire Constabulary had multiple opportunities to connect the dots. Between 2019 and 2022, police responded to 4 separate calls from his home address regarding his concerning behavior. Their response? A referral to MASH, the multi-agency safeguarding hub, without any further escalation. Even more disturbing is the assessment from Children's Social Care, which remarkably concluded that social work support was not required. Instead, they recommended early help, a less intensive intervention completely inappropriate for someone with his documented history of violence. When his mental health challenges continued, professionals noted his difficulty with engagement. But when he stopped participating entirely in February 2023, the system simply let him drift away, rather than recognizing this withdrawal as yet another warning sign. Perhaps most chilling was his attempt, just days before the attack, to return to Range High School wearing what he called his death suit, the same hooded sweatshirt and surgical mask he would later wear during the massacre. Only his father's intervention with the taxi driver prevented this journey. Yet somehow, this deeply disturbing incident still didn't trigger emergency intervention. As the dust settles on the Southport tragedy, we're left with a troubling question. How many more children need to die before we stop playing political word games? Jonathan Hall, KC's recommendation to create a new offense category for non-terrorist mass casualty attacks isn't just bureaucratic reshuffling, it's a dangerous distraction from the real issue. Britain's threat assessment system is fundamentally broken. When experts themselves admit the current framework fails to identify violent individuals who don't fit neat extremist profiles, we're not looking at a classification problem. We're looking at a protection failure. This new category, while carrying a life sentence, conveniently sidesteps the accountability mechanisms built into terrorism legislation. The hard truth is that our government would rather invent new categories than fix the systems that failed these children. Until we demand real reform instead of semantic shell games, we're simply waiting for the next tragedy while pretending we've solved the problem. The victims of Southport deserve more than terminological innovations. They deserve a security apparatus that actually works.